So far, we've covered some pretty creepy monsters on Hyrule History. Skull Kids sure can be unsettling, and the Re-Dead can be downright horrifying. Yet, if you ask anybody who's grown up on Legend of Zelda what their scariest memory is, you're probably not going to get either of those monsters as an answer. You're going to get something else. The Legend of Zelda is, for the most part, a happy series. The games are all about overcoming adversity, tackling problems together instead of alone, and above all else, The Legend of Zelda is about never giving up on hope. Kakariko Village is a great metaphor for this. It's a village that's based on hope. Impa opened the village up to the poor and needy, and it was again used for this purpose after Ganon destroyed Castletown. Kakariko Village is in a way emblematic of the same sense of hope that The Legend of Zelda stands for. Yet, just like The Legend of Zelda, all isn't exactly as it seems. Underneath the happy facade most of the Legend of Zelda games offer, something unsettling or even horrifying can often be found. And underneath Kakariko Village, we can find true terror. Welcome back to Hyrule History, my friends. Prepare yourself. Today, we talk about the Dead Hand. Happy Halloween. The horrifying creature known as the Dead Hand is only found in Ocarina of Time both as a child and an adult. It's found when the hero of time enters Kakariko Village. In the center of the village is a well full of water. When Link plays the Song of Storms in the Kakariko windmill, a storm will occur, causing the windmill to begin spinning very rapidly and drain the well of its water. Link is given hints that the magical treasure of the Sheikah, the Lens of Truth, is in the bottom of the well, so he journeys to its depths to retrieve it. There is a lot to say about the bottom of the well, but that belongs in its own video. As an overview though, the bottom of the well is an accursed place full of torture devices and corpses, as well as demonic enemies such as the Re-Dead, Wallmaster, and the Green Bubble. At the end of the dungeon, Link opens the door to find a rather grisly sight, a dirt room with mounds of fleshless bones on the ground. Whatever lives in here has claimed hundreds of victims. Sticking out of the room in a sort of circle are numerous long, fleshy hands. Link has no choice but to approach these hands. The moment he does, he's grabbed, and something jumps out of the ground at him. It jumps out at him. A horrifying battle ensues, with Link finally slaying the abomination. He claims his treasure and leaves, but this would not be the last encounter that the hero of time would have with the Dead Hand. After the time skip, Link is put to work gathering the medallions of the sages. He conquers the Forest Temple, makes short work of the Fire Temple, and somehow gets through the Water Temple. He's then left with the Shadow Temple and the Spirit Temple. Regardless of which he tackles first, he eventually ends up in the Shadow Temple, which again is important enough to warrant its own video, so we'll gloss over most of it now. He fights his way through the hellscape of a temple, eventually defeating the mighty Bongo Bongo and receiving the medallion and continuing on his journey. In the temple, however, he encounters another Dead Hand. The chamber is identical to the last one, and so is the hand itself, although it does have a few more arms this time. The fight can go pretty much easier for Link, as he can use the Lens of Truth gained from the last Dead Hand to see where the current one is underground, and then use bombs to damage it and cause it to be vulnerable. After this, the Dead Hand's not seen again across the entire series. With how many nightmares this creature provided, that's likely for the best. Where to even start with this absolute abomination? The Dead Hand is a creature of two parts, its main body and its limbs, which are known as Infinite Hands. Side note, Infinite Hands sounds like a move that someone on Naruto would use. The creature's main body looks like a mound of bloody, leprous, pale white flesh, covered in blood and bizarre purple splotches. Its flesh actually doesn't look dissimilar from the like-like. It has a disgusting arched back and arms that end in a sort of severed point. It has a disturbingly long neck and an even more disturbingly human face. It has pure dead black eyes and a massive set of teeth that are horrifying in the same way the meme of those sharks with teeth are. All in all, it looks like a zombie, and its translated German name is Brainsucker, so this seems to check out. However, YouTuber Dr. Wily has a video that makes a pretty convincing case that the Dead Hand is based on the mythological monster known as the Prida, so definitely give that video a watch and decide for yourself. The Infinite Hand, on the other hand, sticks out of the ground and aims almost disturbingly straight towards the roof, shaking and swaying in place. They share the same pale flesh color as the body, with the same blotches of blood and purple stuff. They end in a clawed hand, with each finger being coated in blood. All in all, it's no wonder why this thing horrified us so much. It still horrifies me now. Nintendo must have thought so too, because they made the dead hand less creepy in the 3DS remake. Its skin looks less like diseased human flesh, and more like a sort of ooze or gel. It doesn't have bloody splotches on it anymore, and its little nubs don't look like severed arms anymore. Instead, they look like tendrils with an almost adorable little thumb on the end. The face, however, is still as horrifying as ever, so all in all, still nightmare fuel. The dead hand seems to spend a lot of its time underground. It has its infinite hands sticking out of its bone pile, and as soon as it senses someone near, it tries to grab them with one of its hands. When it senses that it succeeded, it dives out of the bone pile and attacks, taking massive bites out of whatever its prey is. It seems to have some sort of level of regeneration power as well, as when you destroy one of the hands, it'll grow back after 20 seconds or so. These hands may have some sort of limit, however, because if too many of the hands are destroyed, the dead hand will come out of the bones to defend the remaining hands. It's unknown how the dead hand was created. It likely wasn't a creature of nature, and it could have possibly been created by some magical means. We'll go into more detail as to who could have created the dead hand in the theory section, but we have some level of proof of this. We know that the dead hand is magic on some level, as Link can use the Lens of Truth to see the creature while it's underground. The lens doesn't allow us to see other enemies while they're burrowed, so that means the dead hand is either somewhat magical in origin, or it actually is using magic to make itself disappear, which is why the Lens of Truth can see it. We don't really know what the purpose of the dead hand being in the bottom of the well in the Shadow Temple is, but we do know one thing. It eats humanoids, and it's eaten a lot of them. It's kind of hard to make out the skeletons that form the floor of the chamber that the dead hand is found in the original Ocarina of Time, but there is no difficulty in the 3DS remake. The chamber of the dead hand contains hundreds of skeletons, all stripped of their flesh, all lying in a mound on the ground. The dead hand eats people, and it really enjoys it. If Link hadn't been successful, he would have had his flesh devoured off his bones, and he would have joined the rest of the skeletons. We don't know much about the dead hands that has been confirmed, but we sure do have some speculation, and I'd like to talk about the most interesting theories about the dead hand. The two things we're going to talk about in this section are what the hell even are the dead hand to begin with, and why is it in the bottom of the well in the Shadow Temple? To begin with, what is the dead hand? Well, there are two competing theories, one of which I think is the correct one. The first theory is one that you would really need to be brushed up on your Zelda lore to even remember, because it has to do with the origin of the bottom of the well. There's a man in Kakariko Village that'll fill you in on the origin of the well. He tells us that, a long time ago, there was a man in this very village who had an eye, they said, could see the truth. Now, usually, you have to train your mind's eye, most strenuously, to actually see the truth. But this fella, no. They say he had a different way of doing things. His house stood where the well is now. Many people believe that this man became the dead hand. Some theories say that Bongo Bongo changed him, and others say that he used his eye to create the Lens of Truth, and then turned into a dead hand while guarding the Lens of Truth through methods similar to the previously mentioned Prita. YouTuber Newborn Keelik has the best version of this argument, and I'd recommend checking his video out to get a full grasp of the argument. I disagree with this argument, however. While I think that it's likely true that the man who could see the truth was probably the one who created the Lens of Truth, I don't think that he turned into a dead hand. My first counterpoint is that there are two dead hands in the game. If there was only one dead hand, I think there would be some room for argument, but there are two of them, in two very different places. I suppose you could make the argument that they are the same dead hand and he just somehow got from the bottom of the well to the Shadow Temple, but I think at that point you'd need some proof or else it's a bit of a stretch. My second counterpoint is that if he really were a dead hand, intent on guarding the Lens of Truth he made, there would be no reason for him to be in the Shadow Temple. It makes sense for him to be guarding the Lens of Truth if we assume he made it, but there's no reason for him to be guarding the hover boots of all things, which there is zero proof that he made. In order for this theory to be correct, one would have to explain why he's guarding the hover boots with even more ferocity than he's guarding the Lens of Truth. The second theory, which I find more likely, is that the dead hand was created either by the same person or entity that created Bongo Bongo, or that they were created by Bongo Bongo himself. The main reason for believing this is because of the similarities between Bongo Bongo and the dead hand. Both of them are the upper body of a humanoid, with the rest either not being there or out of sight. Both of them have arms that end in nubs that look like they've been severed. Both of them have hands that are separated from them but still operate with them. And possibly the most interesting of all, both of them can disappear, only to be found through the use of the lens of truth. I find the idea that the dead hand is the remnants of the man who could not see the truth to be a little far-fetched. Not to mention that I find it far more likely that the man who could see the truth is Bongo Bongo himself, but that's a video for another time. The second question is what the dead hands were doing in the Shadow Temple and the bottom of the well to begin with. There isn't much to go on here, but there are two competing ideas. The first being that the Bongo Bongo and the dead hand were created by the Sheikah to aid in their motives. We know for a fact that the Shadow Temple was used as an interrogation and torture facility by the Sheikah, and the bottom of the well likely served a similar purpose. It's possible that the Dead Hand was created by the Sheikah as a way to deal with the people they tortured after they got the information they wanted, or if they didn't. Maybe they just opened the door to the Dead Hand's chamber and threw them in. There's no direct evidence of this, but I do find interesting the sheer amount of skeletons that are found in the Dead Hand's chamber. There are literally hundreds of corpses in this room, and I find it highly unlikely that hundreds of adventurers just somehow found themselves in the bottom of the well or in the Shadow Temple just to get eaten by Dead Hands. The Shadow Temple and the bottom of the well are the kind of places you really only visit with a sense of purpose. So the sheer amount of corpses does lend a little bit of credence to the idea that possibly the Sheikah could have been the one to fill the rooms up with the victims for the Dead Hand to eat. The other idea is once again just that Bongo Bongo created the Dead Hands and placed them in the room that they're found in, and was perhaps the one to supply them with their bodies. Neither of these versions of the second theory really have much actual practical evidence to support them, but I do lean towards the idea that the Sheikah were the one to feed the Dead Hand corpses. Horror author H.P. Lovecraft once said that the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear. Could this be why encounters with things like the Dead Hand and the Re-Dead stick out in our memory so strongly? I think that's likely the case. Legend of Zelda can be a deceptively horrifying series, and I think nowhere is this better shown than with the Dead Hand. Something so terrifying attacking a child so young is the basis of horror stories going back as far as human record. Thank you for watching another episode of Hyrule History. And hey, when you lay in your bed tonight, be sure to cover your feet. I'd hate for an infinite hand to grab you.